I'm so excited about your brand. I've had a chance to get to know a bit of the work that you've done because I believe, we'll talk about that later. But I wanted to really talk with you first about getting some insight into what your companies do, so people who are meeting you for the first time can get a sense, and then we'll delve into the juicy goodness of the other issues. But talk to us about Standard Wellness Maryland, and talk to us about the Forest, and we can dive in after that.
Absolutely. So, as you know, I'm an entrepreneur and I have founded an organization called Standard Wellness Maryland. We don't just cultivate cannabis, but we are also cultivating respect and authenticity in the company, and community empowerment is at the forefront of what we do. We have a vertically integrated operation. And so, for listeners who don't know what that means, that's essentially a business that goes from seed to sale of the product. We have
Mm.
cultivation, we've got processing or manufacturing, and then we also have distribution, which is the retail and finishing touch in sort of that manufacturing and distribution chain. And then our retail establishment's name is The Forest. So that's a unique brand. We're sort of doing business as in the forward facing or, community facing part of our business.
I love the name The Forest. You got to give us some insight. And I mean, this from seed to sale, obviously we're talking about cannabis, so that makes perfect sense. But The Forest, give us a sense of the reasoning behind that particular name.
Yeah, so that's a good question. And people ask me that all of the time. The forest really symbolizes natural growth and sort of healing. And for me,
Mm.
community, because inside of the community, there are are people that are purchasing, there are elected officials, there are other business people there. I mean, inside of the community that we'll be in and those that we're going to be in Maryland, it's sort of like a beautiful salad of different folks that represent who makes up the folks in our community. And the forest is populated by community too. And so for
Mm.
me, the growth, the healing, the community, it's a reflection of our brand's values and mission. And it's a connection to the natural product, right? The name sort of evokes this idea of cannabis as a plant-based natural remedy rooted in wellness and sustainability. And forests are often seen as places of serenity and balance and rejuvenation. And so it really aligns with the atmosphere that we're trying to create in our dispensary. And I would just say, sort of metaphorically, um, for me, like a forest, wellness is about nurturing growth and sort of resilience and interconnectedness. Again, marrying our mission to develop people in a positive way and their relationship with cannabis in a really positive way. And it's an ecosystem in a forest. And I think cannabis is also representative of a really substantive ecosystem in this country. And so, um, that's what the forest is. It's a place of discovery. And I think finding oneself and one's relationship with cannabis. And that's what we hope to bring in our store to clients with the flagship store in Baltimore.
I love everything about this. You may not know this, but every day on this show, we have a segment at the very beginning called "The Moment of Gratitude," where
Gratitude. Yeah,
yes,
girl.
yes, where we focus on something that's going to inspire a sense of gratitude, and that can be applicable to personal issues that people may be facing individually, or collective issues that we are facing as a community. And the idea of nature has always featured very prominently in the moment of gratitude, because, as a
Yeah.
dear friend of mine says, we're not just living in nature; we are nature. We are
Yeah.
extensions of this planet and part of this planet. And so the idea of the forest as an ecosystem, and I was a couple of weeks ago, we were on a drive with our kids in the car, and we were talking about the difference between cannabis and hard drugs. Now, some of you in the audience may be wondering, why in the world are we having this conversation? Y'all know I have a 17-year-old and an 11-year-old, and so we have spicy discussions. But I was pointing to the side of the road where we were like driving through. You're on a highway, but there's like woods on the side, and
Yep.
I was like, you see those plants? Cannabis can grow like that. Like weed grows like the tree, it's like that. Hard drugs are like produced in a factory. So like breaking
Mhm.
down for them the difference. So your definition and your explanation really resonates with me. And the idea of having not just a part of the seed to sale framework, but actually it covering the gamut from seed to sale. Is that how you all began, or did you start with one component of cannabis and then expand to have, basically from the rooter to the tutor? Or like, did you always envision and start off with going from a holistic approach where you're designing this entire ecosystem, growing the plant, and ultimately selling it as well?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Let me just say this. Um, I don't know that I started out as an entrepreneur that had a very clear vision. I wouldn't say I
Mm.
stumbled into this, but there was an opportunity that presented itself, and it was like sort of a triggering moment for me. It was a moment that was rooted in a very, very difficult circumstance, and I had to make a choice. And so um, my vision for this company developed over time. The values that I think, we foundationally built this company upon weren't developed over time, but sort of the vision was developed over time. So no, I didn't originally anticipate having a seed to sale organization, but that is in large part because in Maryland, when we first pursued licensure, which was through a merit-based application program, there were only two licenses available, or
Oh,
license
wow.
types. Yeah, license types. Let me clarify. So there were four licenses in the cultivation license type available. And I think 14 processing licenses available in that particular license type. So it wasn't, retail wasn't even an option when we first pursued licensure.
Wow.
But I will tell you that within year one, my goal was to be vertically integrated because I understood sort of the economics of having a vertically integrated business and the
Mm.
challenges associated with only having one license. If you
Wow.
don't have a throughput for your product, it's more challenging. If you only are processing and you don't have, the raw goods to process, it's more challenging. And also, obviously, your profit margins are reduced when you're dealing with external vendors or partners. And so,
Mm.
being able to own everything in sort of that life cycle of getting a product from the ground into someone's body, which is essentially seed to sale, for me was absolutely necessary to own it all.
We're in a time right now where personally, I am very much compelled and drawn to the notion that we got to own everything. Like, we have to own everything.
Yeah, yes.
I have been, not to overly politicize, but I have been, instructing my audience that they should engage in a thought exercise, which is to say that if you were to consider all of the resources that our communities rely upon that are not provided to us by us. Imagine one day the people or the entities that provide those resources, which we desperately need, decide to no longer provide them.
Yeah,
And so the idea of owning everything from
yeah.
the source
Rooted to,
products to the
yeah.
the rooter to the
Rooted to the
tutor
tutor,
is
right?
is really important for me, and you are somebody who's seen the good, the bad, and the ugly of all of this. How difficult was it for you to shift from where you began with your initial entry point into the industry to then being able to expand to cover all of that? Because I'm sure there are folks who are listening saying, I would love to be in a situation like this. There's no way I could eat that entire elephant in one bite. But as
Mhm.
my father, may he rest, used to always say, how you eat an elephant one bite at a time. So take us to that story. You took your first bite in cannabis in which element, and then how did you expand beyond that?
Yeah. So you actually asked two questions, sister, and I'm gonna
I,
lean
I
into
have a
both.
tendency to do that.
Uh-huh. So, Lurie, let me tell you, the first thing is the hardest thing I think as a Black woman, and I identify as Black, though I am also Latina, which is an
Mm,
ethnicity, not a race, right? Sometimes people get that mixed up. But I would say that as an African American woman and a Latina woman, it was incredibly easy for me mentally to shift my mindset. You talked
mm.
about, your mother being of Jamaican descent. My mother is Cuban American. My dad comes from the segregated South. He passed last year. He was in his 80s. Those two
Wow, my
people,
condolences.
girl, these two people were instrumental in shaping how I see the world and how I show up in it and how I work in it, right? And so
Mm,
it never occurred to me because of how I raised that I couldn't do something. Like I was raised with the belief that like some of these rules out here are not made for us, and so they're to be broken. Um, some of
Mm,
these systems are actually meant to hold you down, and so you need to operate outside of them and within them. And so for me, when I decided to transition into this space, which I'll talk about in a second, it never occurred to me that I wouldn't be successful. And mainly that's because the spirit that my parents raised me with was one of fight and
mm,
resilience and sort of a can-do attitude, to simply put it. And so I prayed over the endeavor before I began. And when I felt spiritually that I was supposed to move, I didn't know what the hell I was doing. And I was like, but I got that memo, and I'm about to get my ass up and get to work. And so
mm.
from a psychological standpoint, which I think is oftentimes the most difficult part for people of color, is to understand that they're going to be successful,
Wow.
right? Because we have this whole
Wow.
world telling us we're not going to be successful. We've got systems in place, banking and cannabis in particular, that
Mm,
doesn't give us a clear pathway to accessing capital. And so there's no reason necessarily for us, despite our incredibly resilient ancestors, to believe that we're going to be successful, because it's not clear. The path isn't clear. The words aren't clear. The regulatory environment isn't clear.
right.
But
Right.
I was clear. Like, I knew, all right, I'm about to make a go of this, and this shit is about to work, right? So um
Mm,
the psychological part, the spiritual part was there. The implementing part was difficult. So how this came to be was the part that was a challenge for me. My fiance at the time had said, Christina, basically, I love you working with me. I'm so thankful that you came and supported my incredibly successful development business, real estate development shop, but you're telling me what to do too often, and I'm sick of you, and I'm gonna fire you. So that was the first and only time in my life, girl, that I got fired, Lurie. And let me tell you, I could not believe it. But it wasn't without sort of an exit ramp. And he said, I want you to have this conversation with these two men. They're interested in doing something cannabis, and drugs. And I'm
wow.
like, what? I know drugs.
Ooh.
So my father was a criminal defense attorney and was a very, very prominent one in the 80s. And so
Mm,
he knew that I was very familiar with my dad's work on, sort of within the criminal justice system in protecting
okay.
his clients that who
Phew.
obviously, they were over policed. This was during the Reagan era of the just say no and let's just lock them all up if they're one shade lighter than eggshell white. And so,
Mm,
um, he knew that I spent summers in the courtroom. And that's, I think, where that comment was coming from. And he said, Christina,
okay.
drugs. I think that was, you understand a little bit about drug policy. You understand a little bit about the system. You understand social justice, and you have a heart for returning citizens. So take a look at this
Mm,
opportunity and see what you can do with it. That was the beginning of my sort of birth into the cannabis space. And I'll tell you, I immediately knew that cannabis wasn't just a plant, it was like a platform. And we
mm,
had a real chance to, in this industry, build something that was incredible, because there was actually a focus on equity. And as you know, there are no other industries outside of the nonprofit sector, which is not really an industry, right? There are many industries
right.
in the nonprofit sector. Um, it's a taxation sort of construct, but I felt this was the only industry that was really putting equity first, even if it was
Wow.
just talk, right? Like, there's power in words. So even if people were sort of critiquing the space and saying, these companies are just sort of tossing equity around, they don't really mean it. I was like, yeah, but so are the legislators, and so are the
Oh.
regulators. And so there's actually some there, guys. Like,
Mm,
at that point, that was in 2017, the Oakland program was off the ground and it seemed to be doing really well. Illinois, had kind of focused on equity. Massachusetts did. And though some of these places didn't get it exactly right, this is not an exact science.
right.
And so I saw an opportunity in Maryland to not only pursue licensure in one of the two categories that was available, again, cultivation and processing, but help the laws that were taking shape positively like affect people like me and our community. So that's a long-winded answer to was it easy? Hell no, it was not easy. Like, not at all. And I'm still grinding. Like, I'm just starting to get my businesses off the ground. And it's been 5 years. But the
Mm,
reality is, the mental part that was an easy sell for me. Believing in myself
mm.
was not the challenge.